Let's get into it now. Russian President Vladimir Putin believes Russia is not to blame for the war in Ukraine, saying both countries are sharing a tragedy. He was making his thoughts known during a televised address with senior military officials. President Putin says he still sees Ukraine as a brotherly nation and claims the conflict is a result of the policy of third countries and not down to Russian policy. That theory, which implies Western expansion is the cause, has been repeatedly dismissed outside of Russia. President Putin claims the West had brainwashed post-Soviet republics, starting with Ukraine. He also told military officials at the gathering to continue the so-called special military operation into 2023. President Putin says there's no limit to the amount of money Russia is willing to spend on this war. In the meantime, he also gave his backing to a plan to boost the size of the armed forces by more than 30%. According to President Putin, Moscow needs to learn from and fix the problems it had suffered in Ukraine. At the end of the year conference, Russia's top military brass defense minister Sergei Shoigu proposed beefing up the armed forces to 1.5 million combat personnel from 1.15 million. This was required to guarantee the solving of problems related to Russia's military security. According to Mr. Shoigu, he says 695,000 of the fighters should be professional contracted soldiers as opposed to conscripts serving mandatory military service. Mr. Shoigu also proposed raising the age range for mandatory Russian military service to cover Russian citizens aged 21 to 30. Under the current system, Russians aged between 18 to 27 can be called for mandatory military service. Now, for the first time since the war began, the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky is set to be on his way to the United States. He was seen earlier at the train station in the southern Polish city of Przemysl, thanks to footage from private broadcaster TVN. That footage showed President Zelensky walking with a group of men in military uniform and sitting in a waiting convoy of cars at the station's platform for trains arriving from Ukraine. TVN reported Zelensky went on to board a plane at Rosto-Jasionka Airport on his trip to Washington, D.C. A trip with Zelensky is first in the 300 days since Russia invaded his country. His visit is expected to last several hours. He'll meet President Joe Biden and top national security aides at the White House, participate in a joint conference with the U.S. president, then go to Capitol Hill to address a joint session of the U.S. Senate and House of Representatives. According to U.S. officials, President Joe Biden will announce nearly $2 billion in further military assistance for Ukraine that will include a Patriot missile battery to help it defend itself against a barrage of Russian missiles. Apart from other stakeholders keeping a close eye on President Zelensky's visit to the United States is Russian President Vladimir Putin. The Kremlin, however, has no faith in the outcome of that meeting. Spokesperson Dmitry Peskov says nothing good will come from it and that Russia sees no chance of peace talks with Kyiv. In a call with reporters, the Kremlin spokesperson said that continued Western arms supplies to Ukraine will lead to a deepening of conflict. There's something which could backfire on Kyiv. He says the supply of weapons continues and the range of supplied weapons is expanding. All of this, of course, leads to an aggravation, he says, of the conflict, and this does not bode well for Ukraine. Well, as we mentioned earlier, this will not be President Zelensky's first visit to the United States as president. The Ukrainian leader met with President Biden on a previous visit to the United States in 2021. During a 2019 visit to New York, President Zelensky denied he had faced pressure from the U.S. President Donald Trump to smear the Biden campaign. Let's bring in our Washington correspondent, Maria Bird. She joins us, virtually to talk about this. Maria, while the White House is still anticipating President Zelensky's visit, what do analysts in the United States think about this?
This is a very historic moment. We are exactly 81 years from Winston Churchill's visit to the U.S. right around Christmas holiday season. As there was pressure for Britain with the Nazis. And so we are in a position that's think this is a very interesting time that the U.S. has decided to have this visit occur. And obviously, President Zelensky of Ukraine has also been amenable to this visit. But I think this is another way that the U.S. is standing as a leader in support of Ukraine. There will be announcements regarding additional support that the U.S. will provide to Ukraine during this visit. And so this is a very monumental moment for the president's administration.
I can't imagine. It is monumental. It's also really important, isn't it? Especially for the Ukrainian president. It'll be his first visit, since the war started in February. It's significant that the United States is the first country he'll be going to, having the first time he's also stepping out of Ukraine, considering all the help that the U.S. has rendered through this war, the military aid, the donations, and all of the funding, helping with the war and so on, even standing the risk of being attacked by Russia, which says that other countries are fighting this war by proximity, by providing weapons to Ukraine. What does this say about U.S.-Ukraine relations and what impact this visit could have, on the war back home?
I think this further confirms the partnership that the U.S. has had with Ukraine, and it also affirms that Ukraine is very appreciative and very much committed to the U.S.'s support. And so I think this is a strong statement to the rest of the world. We do know that there have been conversations, especially last week, regarding China's influence and where China stood in relation to Russia and if they're supporting. And so other countries that have maybe not stood out as strong supporters that are very large economic nations and impacts on our global economy, maybe even providing them with some reason to support Ukraine in their efforts in this war. And so this is also, as we've heard about a month ago, there are desires to end the war. And so I am pretty confident we'll find out later today that there will be conversations around how the U.S. can support the ending of the war.
Is the U.S. also considering, how Russia is viewing this? The Russian Kremlin spokesperson, Dmitry Peskov, says nothing will come out of this visit. They're keeping a close eye on Zelensky going to Washington and the discussions that are expected to take place. They also say that there's no change in the peace talks with Kyiv. So talking about strategy then, and Zelensky is only spending just a few hours in the United States. How much really can be realized and achieved within just a short moment with President Biden?
This is going to be about the aftermath of this and really what is being looked at by the rest of the world, because this is going to hit the global stage. And so the question is, will there be additional pressure put on countries like China? Will there be additional pressure put on some of the Western allies to be more active in the support of Ukraine? And so this is not necessarily about how long they have for a visit. It is about the statement that it will make to the rest of the world. It's also a statement because we all know that there was questions around where the U.S. stood with Russia with the recent prisoner swap and whether the U.S. gave up too much. And so this is another act of the U.S. to say, yes, maybe you can feel that we were a little soft in that area, but we are still very much going to stand as a leader, especially in the war versus Ukraine and Russia.
So I'm also seeing on his itinerary, apart from the meeting he has with President Joe Biden, he's also expected to have a press conference, a joint press conference, and I suppose he'll be speaking, with White House correspondents, about the visits and why he's in the United States and so on. But he's also supposed to go to Capitol Hill to address the Senate and the House of Representatives. This is just one of the very few topics that the House of Representatives and the Senate agree on, isn't it? So there could be some success there, with the support that the U.S. legislature might be providing for Ukraine, right?
You're exactly correct. We know the Senate has been very busy between all the releases of the Trump tax information, the recent charges that were recommended to Department of Justice. So they are very busy, the representatives at this time. And so this is another area that they will address before they go on recess. We know that President Zelensky has previously received support, as you said, and whether or not Republicans and Democrats agree exactly on how the U.S. has supported. They do believe in the support, and so that's an area that they will come together, whether or not it's financial support or actually military artillery support. That is something that we will likely see come out of this visit as well.
Maria, thanks again for joining us on the program.
Thank you.
We're still here with the updates coming from the Russia-Ukraine invasion. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov says it appears that no European countries are conducting a proper investigation into the series of explosions that ruptured the Nord Stream gas pipelines back in September. Russia's blamed Britain for the explosions, claims rejected by London, while investigators in Sweden and in Denmark say they were deliberate results of sabotage, though they did not name any possible culprits. Well, Russian and Belarusian forces have continued their joint military drills in Belarus, training urban assault techniques and forest navigation. The defense ministries of both countries reported earlier today. Footage released by the Belarusian defense ministry said to be shot in Belarus showed tanks firing missiles, troops training in mock house interiors, and armored people carriers driving people woodland. Russia's defense ministry says the purpose of these drills is combat coordination. Earlier in the week, President Vladimir Putin was in Minsk to hold talks with his Belarusian counterpart, Alexander Lukashenko, fanning fears in Kyiv that the Russian leader intends to pressure his ex-Soviet ally to join a fresh round of offensives to open a new front against Ukraine. Ukraine's top general Valery Zaluzhny said last week Russia is preparing 200,000 fresh troops for a major offensive that could come from the east, the south, or even from Belarus itself, and that could come as early as in January, but he expects it more likely in the spring. Pope Francis today called on people to remember Ukrainian children suffering in the cold this Christmas. The Pope has been making appeals for Ukraine at nearly every public appearance, usually at least twice a week since Russia invaded its neighbor in February. Just last week, Pope Francis urged people to spend less on Christmas celebrations and gifts this year and send the difference to Ukrainians to help them get through the hunger and cold of winter.
La pace sia con voi.